Hi, my name is Paul Sheriff. Welcome to the PDSA.net Provider Library Overview. So our provider library is simply a set of providers such as a data provider, configuration management, exception management, things like that, as well as some general class libraries. Their purpose is to be able to use in any type of .NET application. Now each provider can be used separately or they can all be used together. We also include lots of samples to get you started quickly and easily, and of course tons of documentation to help you out. There's a lot of benefits to using a .NET provider library, and especially the one from PDSA. It's very easy to use, not like some of those other provider libraries that are out there. You get great flexibility and maintainability. You get consistency from one provider to the next. You'll see the same design pattern used over and over again. Very easy to add new providers with very little coding. We have excellent exception handling that's built throughout the whole set of provider library. It's also great for just learning how to do a provider model. We do include a free ebook called Architecting ASP.NET Applications as a nice little bonus. So, what kind of providers are in the PDSA.NET Provider Library? We do have a data provider that allows you to connect up to SQL Server, Oracle, using ODBC or OLADB. And again, of course, since it's a provider, you can add on your own. Also a configuration management system, so you can choose where to store your configuration settings, and we include lots of different places to store them out of the box. We do have cryptography for hashing and symmetric algorithms, as well as a provider for key management, where you want the keys for that cryptography. A great exception handling model, and messaging as well for data-driven messages. We also include a couple of utilities. One is to help you configure your configuration settings and encrypt them. Another one is to actually move the settings you need, all the nice configuration settings you need from a sample right into your application's config files. It also helps to synchronize your configuration file settings between QA and production. So our data layer provider is simply a wrapper around ADO.NET. Of course, you have full support for transactions and dynamic SQL as well as stored procedures, and again, lots of samples and documentation on how to use these. We do have providers that are shipped with the product for SQL Server, ODBC, OLADB, and Oracle. Here's a little example of some code that you might use to actually use our provider to get a data set. As you can see, it's very simple. We have a PDSA Data Manager class. It has a shared property called provider, and that pulls the default provider from the config file. And then you just say get data set or get data reader, passing in a SQL statement. The connection string and everything is in the configuration file itself, but there is an optional parameter that you can pass here, okay, another override or overload to this method that you can pass in the connection string as well. Now, if you wish, you can specify a specific provider, so if you do need to use more than one provider within a single application, there is, as you can see here, a getProvider method. And you can pass in the name of what that provider is in your configuration file. It'll return that provider to you, and then you can call the getDataset method on that provider. So this allows you to use one or many providers in the same application, going against SQL Server and Oracle, for example. Now, the configuration management provider allows you to store configuration settings anywhere. It's becoming more and more popular to move those settings out of a config file. Our configuration management provider also works with our cryptography system, so if you wish to use our cryptography method to encrypt your settings in your config file, it will work. We do have providers for storing your configuration management provider in the app settings section or in an XML file, in the registry, or in the remote registry as well. Here again is an example of calling our PDSA Config Manager class, again hitting the default provider, and then calling the getSetting method, to which you pass in the key that you're looking for in that XML file or the registry or whatever. And if it doesn't find that key, what is the default value you wish to return? That's what that second parameter is. The cryptography hashing provider does have a wrapper around the common hashing algorithms like MD5, SHA1, etc. Again, a little example here where you can actually specify which provider to return and then go ahead and create the hash. We do have a wrapper around the common symmetric algorithms as well, DES, triple DES, Reindl, and RC2. Again, an example here. Now, you probably wouldn't hard code a key string and an IV here, but you could. But normally you would retrieve those from our key management provider. And then again, it becomes a simple matter to encrypt using our encrypt method. And if you looked at the cryptography stuff in .NET, those get quite involved. This is much simpler. The key management providers gives you the ways to store those cryptography keys wherever you want. We do have providers for isolated storage, the registry, the remote registry, and an XML file. Again, it works with our configuration management utility as well. This allows you to do the full scenario of encrypting them, moving the keys off, storing them wherever you want, and setting the appropriate provider. Again, here's a little example of using our key management provider where you get the provider, okay, and then you can actually see what the private key is, but that was what you would then pass right to the key string of your symmetric algorithm, for example. The exception handling provider gives you a publish metaphor, very similar to the way the one works from the Microsoft application blocks. The exception handlers are listed in the config file. We give you providers for email, one or more email addresses, file, event log, and also one for a database as well. Here's an example where you do a try, you have a catch. The first thing you would do would be to publish your exception handler, and then you would display the message to the user or something, and for that you could actually use our messaging provider as well. Now, our messaging provider is used in those situations where you want to present data-driven messages to the user, and you want to be able to store messages somewhere else other than a resource file. Resource files can be a little limiting. This gives you a lot more flexibility by using our messaging provider. You can store those messages in XML or SQL Server. It's also a great way to present better exception messages to the user. Instead of you getting the default message on an unhandled exception from .NET, which as you know are quite cryptic error messages, you can actually pass in that exception management system to our, or that exception that you got from .NET to our messaging provider. It will interpret it and return the appropriate message to you. Again, very simple example of you create a message provider, you get the default, and then you call the get message, passing in the name, or if you want to get a better .NET message, okay, you can actually call it passing in the exception handler, and then based on the type, you can set those types up in your XML file or your SQL Server or wherever your data store is, and will retrieve that particular message. The pricing for our PDSA.NET Provider Library is $79 per developer. This includes email support, source code, product updates and bug fixes, and a 5% discount on upgrading to our full PDSA.NET Productivity Framework as well. A fantastic deal, especially if you upgrade to our full suite of products. So, our PDSA.NET Provider Library is a real low-cost alternative to building your own data model or using one that's out there that you don't get any support on, that's out in the free public domain. Okay, so support is available, easy to implement, easy to use. Visit www.pdsa.com/library for more information and more videos. Thank you.